Okay, welcome back everyone to Coffee and a Q. We're on episode 2. It is cold this morning. I'm out in the wilderness. You might be able to pick where I am. If you can guess where I am actually, then you have to get something. So if you can message and tell me where I am in this spot, I'll find a way to reward you for that. Today's coffee was from a new one in Wyoming called On the Go. They use cohort beans apparently. I actually really liked it because it had that real strong coffee taste, almost slightly bitter, but in a way that I like it. Like I said last week, I don't really like a milky coffee, even though I get a flat white, but I like to really taste that strong coffee flavor. So I give that one a thumbs up over the bakery coffee from last week. Um, so just a reminder of what this is a weekly Q that we talk about. We go over everything that I've sort of come up with. It's just quickly, off the dome. So no editing, it just gets posted. So it looks like we've narrowed it down to YouTube, Instagram. On Instagram, it's just a clip of it because no one's watching a 10-minute video on Instagram. So I do about 30 to 60-second clip on Instagram, the full video on YouTube, and then the audio on Apple Podcasts and Spotify Podcasts. So that's all the places you can find it. New merch, actually. So, well, I shouldn't say merch. New clothes for me. I guess if people did want it, we can make this happen. RunSharp coaching hoodies and shirts. They just came in. Very comfortable, very happy because it is winter. So I'm happy with that. Today's Q is, well, really the title, you've already saw it. You are overstriding. That is a blanket term, but most of the people that read that, it's probably true. You are overstriding. A lot of people don't think they need to change their running form, don't think they're overstriding, they don't think there's an issue. I can almost guarantee, I can't guarantee, but you probably are doing something wrong in your running, and most likely, most of you listening, it is overstriding. So let's go over what is overstriding and how do I know that you are overstriding. So overstriding is basically when you land out in front. Well, like you hear a lot, you want to try and land under your center of mass, or some people say under your hips. We're going to talk about that. I do have my clipboard with some notes here. We want to talk about they say land under your hips, land under your center of mass. What you're actually looking for is landing underneath a bent knee. So when we're running, you shouldn't have a straight leg on impact. It doesn't look right, doesn't feel right. You should have a soft knee or a bent knee on impact, and you're trying to approach being underneath that bent knee. So we like to think of, if I even draw a little picture, let's see if this works out. So if I draw a leg with a knee and a foot. All right, so here we've got our foot, leg. We want the middle of the ankle to be underneath the middle of the knee. Anyone that's listening, you can visualize that. Middle of ankle, underneath, middle of knee. We're approaching that. So it doesn't mean that we need to be there. And actually, the science sort of says that we want that angle of the shin to be at around 4 to 7 degrees. So you still actually are slightly in front of the knee because that gives you time to load up and then transfer that energy into your next step. If you land directly under, you're probably not having enough time to actually load up everything to then spring up again. But the problem is if you land too far in front, then you are increasing your braking forces. So think of it, if you need to slow down, if you're sprinting, you need to slow down, what do? You put your feet out in front of you, bang, bang, bang. It's like digging your heel into the ground to try and slow yourself down. And I posted a little photo. Nobody really saw it. I think I got like 5 likes, but a photo of Fred Flintstone driving his whatever car it was, the one with the stone wheels. When he put on the brakes in that car in the Flintstones cartoon, he would put both feet into the ground, toes up, heels down, screech to a stop. And that literally visualizes what happens when you land out in front of that bent knee, or a lot of people with outstretched straight leg. You're putting on the brakes straight away, and you are slowing down every step. You're not maximizing your energy return and energy storage in every step. So that's what overstriding is landing too far out in front of a bent knee. A lot of the time it's landing with an outstretched leg on the heel. Now, that doesn't mean that necessarily heel striking itself is bad, but for 99% of people, the heel strike, if you're landing on the heel, it's a byproduct of overstriding. So a lot of the time, if you're not overstriding, you're not heel striking. Some people can have a nice stride with a bit of a heel strike, but it's pretty hard to land underneath the bent knee or approaching underneath the bent knee and have the heel up high, have that high foot inclination. You'll tend to have more of a neutral foot inclination. Some people even a negative, so you're more toe down. Not necessarily saying that we want to change that. Now, before we get started with talking about everything else with it and what you can do to improve on it, I want to say and make this clear, do not change from a heel strike to a midfoot or a forefoot strike overnight, because that will result in different injuries than what would have been caused from that heel strike or that overstride. So take your time in making any changes if you decide to do so. It should be implemented week by week, very small changes, very small cues. And that comes down to when I coach people to change their form, it's small things. It'll happen, but even the advice a lot of the time is only do 10% of your running for that next week, trying to work on foot strike. The rest of it, you just do it as normal. Keep working on your arms, keep working on your posture. Those are things that you can do all the time, but this foot strike needs to gradually be changed. So let's talk a little bit more about what we know about overstriding, and we'll say heel striking and overstriding, they're the same thing in this context. 90+% of recreational runners are heel strikers or overstriders. We're going to say overstride, that's our term. So that also means heel striking in this context. 90+% of recreational runners. The elite runners is slightly lower because a lot of the time they're more efficient. They're running really well. They're running fast, so they're probably running with better form, reducing that overstride. Doesn't mean all of them though. Now, when we overstride, our braking forces are increased by up to or even more than 10%. So that means that every step you take, you're putting 10% more braking forces into the stride. That's something we don't want. And that's every single step. And I've talked about this in a few things recently, but let's go over a few stats with it. So there's a study that shows that it can be as much as 17 milliseconds every single stride that you are spending more time on the ground. That's 17 milliseconds longer on the ground every step when you're landing out in front. So let's go over some paces with that to put that into context. So let's say you're running, I've put it 170 cadence because that's pretty average. Some people run a lot more, some people run less. Let's put it in the middle. We want to be somewhere 165 to 180 is sort of that range we want to be in. 170 is probably a good spot to work with. So let's start with 8 minutes per kilometer. A lot of very beginner runners, that's their starting pace, somewhere around there. Could be a bit slower. If you're running at 8 minutes per kilometer, 170 cadence, and you're spending 17 milliseconds longer every step, that's 23 seconds a kilometer that you're slowing down, that you could increase 23 seconds a kilometer just by shifting that foot strike a bit. If we go to 7 minutes a kilometer, that's 20 seconds a kilometer. If we go to 6 minute pace, that's 17 seconds a kilometer. 5 minute pace is 14 seconds a kilometer. 4 minute pace is 11 seconds a kilometer. Now, if we basically halve that and say, instead of spending 17 milliseconds per step longer on the ground, we say 8 milliseconds. Now, if we go back to 8 minutes a kilometer, that's 10 seconds per kilometer you're spending longer per kilometer you're spending on the ground or slowing down. At 7 minutes a kilometer, you're 9.5 seconds quicker every kilometer. 6 minutes is 8 seconds a kilometer. 5 minute pace is 7 seconds a kilometer, and 4 minute pace is 5.5 seconds a kilometer. So those are big differences. And think over even at 4 minutes a kilometer, which is quite quick, a lot of people can't run a 5K at that pace. You're over 25 seconds quicker in that 5K just from changing that foot strike. So if you're already at 4 minutes a kilometer and you're still overstriding, imagine those changes you can make. Now, this is something we want to go to now is our injury rate, actually. Let's talk about that. 50 to 75% injury rate among the general population. And I think a large part of that comes down to the overstriding. So, and there's other things that come with it, but that's mostly where these injuries come from, is landing in the wrong spot, usually out in front of that bent knee. Now, these injuries that can occur, shin splints or other shin-related injuries. We got knee injuries, so runner's knee, patella tracking injuries, patella pain. Hamstring, you can get, because your knee and your shin is working so hard, your hamstring actually tries to take over and it overworks, especially if you've got poor posture. If you're overstriding and have poor posture, you're putting that hamstring in a really compromised stretch position, and that you can end up with some hamstring niggles or tears. And then we've got back pain, which comes from that increased braking force, putting all that force through your joints individually. When we land stacked, say ankle, knee, hip, more in a line, that force is distributed across all of that. When we land out in front, ankle, knee, then hip take the force. So that can also then go up to the back. The back then takes a lot of load on its own. We can end up with back pain there. Then another one is the big one, a lot of people get this, is tibial stress injuries, which can be a stress reaction or a stress fracture. So even just lower leg in general, stress fractures, whether that or reactions. And that comes from that not sharing the load. Instead, it is individual load across those joints and those systems. So we've got all that. Let's talk about some things that I've noticed with overstriding. Is people say, well, I've been running my whole life like this, landing on the hill, and I haven't been injured yet. Why change now? Maybe that's true, but it's a weird way of looking at it, because just because, and maybe you've said, oh, this person heel strikes and they get away with it. Well, yeah, they've gotten away with it. Lucky them. Just because they get away with it doesn't mean you will. And if you've run your whole life and you've not had any injuries, that's great. And maybe it's not worth changing. It's possible. Keep it the same. But if you're leaving a bit of performance behind, then maybe it's worth making that change. Now, what else comes from making the change is you feel smoother, you feel more springy, you feel effortless when you're running. If you feel clunky and feel like each step you're working and feel like you're pulling the ground along every stride, try changing that foot strike a bit. Even just do a stride and change that foot strike. Focus on landing more underneath yourself. You'll just feel like you're gliding along the ground. Rather than reaching out and pulling the ground along, you're landing more in that right spot and you're pushing your way along. Huge difference when you feel that. The pushing along the ground rather than pulling the ground along is something that once you feel it, you can't go back. Now, I don't know what it is, but I'm feeling worried that this is not recording. Let's have a look. We're still recording. We're good. All right, this is a longer one than last week. That's good. So let's not go too long, because the idea of this podcast as well is I don't want it to be 30 or 40 minutes, even though that's great for easy runs for people to listen to. But I know I find it hard myself. Sometimes I just want a really quick podcast that's straight to the point. 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes. I can listen to it on the drive home from work, that sort of thing. So that's what I'm trying to give here. I'll do some longer ones. There might even be some interviews eventually. But let's talk about some cues now on how you can help with that overstride. There's a lot more to it. So let's just look. I'm not giving you direct advice on what to do. I'm just saying in general, this is what could be advice, maybe to someone that I train, but it's very specific circumstances. So I can't say if you're watching this, do this, but this is something to think about and sort of analyze your own running and see. Or reach out and get an actual analysis and see what could be helped in your running. So there's been that very common cue that you'd hear a lot, land underneath your hips while you're running. Now that's a good cue because it does help you start approaching that landing underneath the knee. You're not landing underneath your hips when you're running. As much as they say that, you do not land under your hips when you're running. It doesn't happen. Never. No matter if you're sprinting or if you're jogging, you're landing out in front of the hips by quite a lot. Your knee is way in front of the hips. If you're landing underneath the hips, your leg would be dead straight on when you hit the ground. It doesn't. That's just not how it works. Try it. You'd have to run with straight legs to make that happen. So, but it is a good cue to think, try and land underneath your hips. It helps you to approach that spot. All we're looking to do, let me draw another diagram here. Let's see. So we sort of say, terrible, but I've drawn the ground. So for anyone listening, we've got an outstretched leg with the heel hitting the ground, the toe pointing up. So if we can see that there, the outstretched leg, here's the knee, underneath it is the ground, and there's no foot to be seen. Now, if we can turn that, or go from that outstretched leg and start approaching that ankle underneath the knee, doesn't mean we have to be there, but we have to be approaching it upon landing. That's what we're looking for. Or another way to think about it, we are landing on a backwards traveling leg. So we're going forwards and our lower leg is traveling backwards before it hits the ground. Once you hear that, it makes a lot of sense. If you can, it's harder to make it happen than to think about it, but if you can make that happen, you've got smoother running. You're saving those, say, it could be anywhere from 1 millisecond to 20 milliseconds every single step that you're spending on the ground just by approaching landing underneath that bent knee. So even if you're saving 1 millisecond every step, that's still savings. And over a marathon, a lot of you guys are running marathons, that's minutes. or even just 1 minute. Do you want a 1 minute PB? Yes, you do. Okay, so that's one. And it also comes down to what I call lower leg swing, which a lot of recreational runners do. And I see it a lot in my track shoes. I see it a lot in the kids I train and the adults I train, is the lower leg swing. It's when, as you're running, instead of the foot lifting up nicely, creating that nice bean shape that we sort of look at, the kidney bean shape, or just think of it more as a cycle. When we're running, we want those cycling legs. What I see a lot, instead of the nice lift of the foot coming around, then it comes down, strikes back, lands nicely, goes again, we see more of a pendulum swing. The foot gets behind you, comes off the ground, not much, and then it just swings through and basically stays in contact with the ground, almost touching the ground the whole way along, swings through, then it comes out in front, gets a bit of height, and then it lands and lands way out in front. It's that pendulum swing. We're looking more for a lift off the ground, getting up off the ground rather than swinging along the ground, because that gives us that height to be able to then approach landing with the middle of the ankle underneath the middle of the knee. So I hope that was helpful to you. I don't have any more to say about that. This is just a quick overview. That's what overstriding was. That's what it causes. That's some direct numbers in what you can save from it, and then a few little cues that can help you get there. If you've got any questions about more specific things to do with overstriding, please reach out, because I want to answer these. This is overstriding in particular is probably my biggest passion, because it is the most common mistake I see in the runners that I train and runners everywhere. I say that I'm cursed with knowledge, because I just, everywhere I go, especially park run or in the most popular running spots around where I coach, I watch runners constantly, and it has to be hundreds of runners a week. I'm just watching, saying, I wish I could coach you, because those little changes will make a huge difference. But also, a lot of these people, they've just come back from injury, or they're injured now, or they've been injured 3 or 4 times in the last couple of years. And it's probably the overstride. That's most likely what it is. For most people, it's the overstride that's causing that injury. And it's not just middle-aged runners. It's young runners. It's very old runners. It's all runners. Even the fit, healthy, sub 20-minute 5K runners, a lot of them are overstriding. And if they're not injured, they could be running a minute quicker just from fixing that. Because not only does it help, I'm getting passionate here, not only does it help run faster in the race, it helps you run faster in training, run more efficiently in training. You can run more reps, you can run more volume, you can do longer long runs, you can stack more training with less risk of injury. You will get faster, it will feel easier. Instead of thinking, oh, I've got to go for a run, now you're like, let's go for a run, because it feels so good. All right, I'm going to leave you with that. So ask me some questions. Let's get some more topics going about overstriding or anything else. Another cue. What's another area of running that you want to talk on? Whether it's mindset, whether it's actually running training, or if it is running form. Put them in. Comment down below. Send me a message. I will make a video on it. All right. This has been Coffee and a Q, episode 2. I've enjoyed this one actually. So thanks, guys. I'll see you next week.